cumulative. The damage is the damage. So the actual damage, the business damage, will be determined by the jury, and you just basically estimate in the complaint. You're not held to that, which is why we pled in excess of. But we're asking for approximately $20 million in actual damages. Let me just quote. It's in the complaint. $10 million in actual damages, $20 million in punitive. And so $30 million, in excess of $30 million. The reason for punitive damages, generally a jury will take a look at the net worth of the defendant who's found liable and determine how much they can assess in punitive damages that will prevent the defendant from ever doing that again. It's punitive. And Hearst Corporation, obviously, with Esquire, is very, very wealthy. So the $20 million estimate is low in terms of what a jury could find. It could wind up in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But in terms of the actual damages, we pled in excess of $10 million for the counts. And I also might add, with regard to the Lanham Act, the Lanham Act does not look at the actual damages. It looks at the advertising revenues. You were that week, so that's relevant.
Yes.
Of Esquire magazine. And those advertising revenues, Esquire will then have an opportunity to show what their net profit was. And if we succeed in our case, and defendants are found liable, then it's trebled by 3 times on the Lanham Act plus attorney's fees and costs.
Does the disclaimer give them any cover after the? It was only up for a few hours before this disclaimer came out, saying it was satire, and that would, their argument, I would assume, they're covered under the First Amendment.
They'll try to make that argument. It's not convincing, because if you look at this so-called disclaimer, it's not really a disclaimer. That's why I read it to you. It's actually a way to grind it in. It added insult to injury. It made matters worse. It disparaged Mr. Farah and Mr. Corsi and their organizations, and said that they should be held up to ridicule. That's why this issue of malice will not be difficult to prove. The author admits that he wanted to do a number on the plaintiffs because they're, in his view, obviously bad people. And as a result, this was not a disclaimer. It actually made matters worse, because he's calling Mr. Corsi, Mr. Farah, and their organizations liars in this disclaimer. He didn't say this was just simple satire. He said, these people are bad people, they should be held up for ridicule, and they're liars. So he in fact reinforced what he had written earlier, which is this book is not accurate, and this book is a fabrication and false. So this is not a disclaimer at all. And it was very, and that's why I say this, it was very stupid to write something like that. He really, Warren and Esquire and Hearst, they dug their own graves with that.
Now the original post, Esquire post, was tagged as satire. Well, not prominently, it was tagged as satire. Do you consider that a mitigating factor in this lawsuit?
No. No, particularly in light of what was said. And then when the Daily Caller calls Warren for comment, he calls Dr. Corsi an execrable piece of shit.
I'd like to point out one other thing, Larry. I don't think anybody initially looked at that article as satire. I received calls from numerous news organizations within the first hour that that article was posted, and none of them even, there was no hint in their minds that this was a parody or satire. They were calling me to find out if it was true. They were calling for comments. And even after the so-called disclaimer was published, the inquiries continued for several days. So,
well, wouldn't the reference to Capricorn 1 be a major clue that it was a satire?
What'd you say?
Wouldn't the reference to Capricorn 1 be a major clue that it was satire?
That would be the only hint in there, because it, but when so much of what the author of the article is saying is untrue, how do you know when he's intentionally putting something in there that's untrue, that is obviously untrue?
I'm looking at the printout here. Where is it stated that this was satire?
In the original post, in the tagging, it wouldn't be there in the print-only version, but in the original format.
Yeah, it
assume
wasn't obvious to anyone who read the article.
I assume it's like a WordPress blog. WordPress and other types of blogging programs have a tag, have a
I'm okay.
provision for having tags. They don't necessarily.
We didn't see any satire on it or tags on it. Secondly, I want to address 2 points. One, a series of interviews you can document. The Bob Grant interview on WABC began with Bob Grant asking, assuming the article was true, how badly we've been damaged by the withdrawal of the book. That's the whole premise of the interview. I had several interviews like that, including recently, where still the impression is that it was said to be true. In relationship to the Capricorn, you might say, well, that was an obvious indication, but then you haven't recently read my Wikipedia entry, because you'd have to equally categorize it as satire for the lies it tells about my background, which we've been unable to correct. And I can point to many other sources on the internet which publish information about me that is just not true. So that in itself was simply an indication of the disdain with which Esquire attempted to hold me in the book.
I have a question for Ms. Sebest. How could somebody release a document that you are stating is so amateurish that it's impossible that it could be authentic? How does that happen? I'm not sure I understand how a forger could forge a document that badly.
I can't speculate on who did the document, on why this happened. All I can say is that from what I'm seeing, whoever put this document together obviously overestimated his abilities. Knew enough to be dangerous, not enough to know how to cover his tracks. I only touched on a surface of things that are wrong. There's topography errors, there's the inconsistencies with the time of 1961. There's inconsistencies in the fact that there's even a background color. There shouldn't be one.
You're saying that layering is impossible in a scanned document?
Correct. You will have a layer, one.
One layer.
One layer.
Multiple
It'll
layers.
be a flattened layer. The only time you have more than one layer is if you've edited the document. And the fact that there's just layers in this document, within seconds after seeing the layers, I was shocked. I'm going, oh my God, I can't believe what I'm seeing, and how sloppy it is too.
This is for Mr. Planner.
I want to, before, just to answer that question, my assumption in terms of why the document was so poorly prepared is that the White House scrambled to produce a fraud between the time that Governor Abercrombie could not find the long form document and my book was coming out. So I think this was a panicked rush job. Clearly the White House couldn't put out a request for proposal for qualified forgers to apply here and submit their costs, so it had to be done by a small group that the president trusted, and obviously that group included someone who felt that they were competent on Adobe software, but yet, as Mara has pointed out, utilized that software in an amateurish fashion to create an apparent and obvious fraud, which was apparent to us in the first hours of looking at it.
If I could add one thing, Jerry. The White House has provided, through the Washington Post, a timeline of when they decided to act with regard to the birth certificate. And their timeline shows that it was 24 hours after Jerry Corsi's book hit #1 on Amazon for the first time. So I think that that speaks to Jerry's answer very directly. I'm sorry, was there another question we interrupted?
Yeah, sorry, about the correspondence between Mr. Warren and Hearst after the satire, or after the article came out. Could you tell us what attempts you made to resolve this issue prior to the filing of the lawsuit?
Well, I, as the lawyer, did not make any attempts. we were out there, my clients were out there with stories and publications saying that they may bring a lawsuit, which was an invitation for Mr. Warren, Esquire, and Hearst to contact us and say, hey, you know, we did something wrong here. You don't even have to admit it. Say we'd like to make good on this. We never got any kind of a response from them or any kind of a entreaty. So we were forced to bring the case. But we did wait to see whether indeed that would happen. And it didn't.
I have a question, Mr. Clayman. Last year you filed on behalf of Rolling Day a lawsuit against the White House Correspondents Association regarding tickets for the Correspondents' Dinner. Now that was basically dismissed from court rather quickly. How do you think you'll fare better on this case?
Well, first of all, we decided not to pursue that. But the issue here is this case, not that case. So if you want to relive that case, we'll do it in some other form. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep, for Mr. Corsi, did you work at all with Donald Trump in this regard? I mean, he's claimed credit for forcing the White House.
Well, Donald Trump called me a number of times and was always curious as to what we were doing. And I constantly advised Donald Trump, including after the birth certificate was released, to say openly what we're saying, and that is that the document needs to be submitted to independent forensic testing. And there should be independent corroborating evidence from the hospital and the attending physician that claims that Obama was born at Kapiolani Hospital and Dr. Sinclair attended the birth. And Mr. Trump didn't advance those arguments very strongly, but he did in the course of the conversation say that repeatedly that his computer golf expert had told him within the first hours of it being released that in his judgment the document was also a fraud. And Trump indicated to me that he continued to believe that. And all the conversations I had with Donald Trump were, he never once asked them to be off the record, and he's a sophisticated user of media, and so we reported the conversations.
Okay, now you've never examined the actual certificate. You've only examined this PDF, right?
Well, I'd love to examine the actual certificate. If the White House would only allow the Hawaii Department of Health to stop the cover-up and to release the original paper or whatever format the document exists, if it exists, a long-form birth certificate, to independent forensic analysis, I'd be thrilled.
Excuse me, is the book any longer relevant?
Yes, I think the relevant in several issues. I think we're still asking, where's the real birth certificate? And we're arguing and maintaining that this is a fraud. We've maintained that the book's publication was a precipitating event that tempted the White House into producing a fraud. And what we're arguing now is that the information in the book, on many different bases, indicates that Obama is not eligible to be president, including dual citizen status from birth, from his father being a citizen of Kenya when he was born. And these issues need to be vetted, need to be examined by the American public, will be examined by the American public, I'm confident, before 2012, and an institution of government needs to be put into place so this problem does not occur in the future.
Let me add here just one quick thing, is that my client here, Dr. Corsi, is not just any run-of-the-mill author. He's an author who, through his publication of a book with regard to swift boats and John Kerry, significantly influenced the election in 2004. He's feared, and for that reason, he's taken seriously. And he's an award-winning journalist, New York Times best-selling author. That creates the intent, part of the intent, other than the admissions of the defendants themselves, as to why they were acting with malice to try to destroy him and everybody in and around him.
And I want to say one thing on the relevance of the book. Right now there's more confusion than ever about what it means to be a natural-born citizen and to be eligible for the presidency of the United States, astonishingly, after all of what's been said and done. And really, the only clarity on this subject is Jerry's book. Yesterday, I saw a Senator Dianne Feinstein letter to a constituent who was asking her about Obama's eligibility. And her response was that